Thank you
Hey,
everyone for joining us. My name is Akash Chougule. We are joined today by Tony West of our AFP Georgia chapter and Congressman Barry Loudermilk of Georgia. There's obviously a ton going on. Gas prices are up, food prices are up. Folks are feeling the pressure, feeling the pinch all across the country. So we're grateful to have this conversation with the congressman. And Tony, I want to turn it over to you first to hear what we're dealing with on the ground in Georgia with AFP.
Well, thank you, Akash. Yeah, it's great to be here with you. Thank you so much, Congressman Loudermilk, for joining us today. I did want to first off thank you, Congressman, for everything you've done for AFP Georgia over the years. Your district office has always been welcoming and accommodating for our activists to come and visit and share AFP legislative priorities with you all. And we really enjoyed you having come speak to us last summer at Raised on the River. That was a really fun event, and our activists just loved getting to spend time with you. So thank you for that. To start off, Georgia's no different. We're suffering at the gas pump. It's been estimated the average Georgian will spend over $1,400 more this year on gas than last year. My question is, what regulatory barriers do you see standing in the way of energy projects in the U.S.? And how can Congress reverse and remove these barriers that are standing in the way of us having energy abundance, and so we don't experience these types of price shocks in the future?
Right. I mean, that's a great question. And the simple answer is the problem is the entire Biden administration. It's across the board with every department, every agency in the federal government. Just since I've been in Congress, we found energy independence here in this nation. It was, I believe, in my first term. Obama was still president. We were able to end a 40-year ban on exporting of U.S. oil. A lot of people don't realize that the United States of America was the largest producer of petroleum products in the world, but we had this ban that we could not export. So a lot of the oil reserves we had were going unused because we had enough to fulfill our own needs, but because of government bureaucracy, we were importing a lot of oil. And so Congress, even with Obama as president, was able to lift that ban. He was opposed to it, but we were able to put it in some legislation he signed. Literally within days of signing the legislation, America became energy independent. We used to hear about OPEC. OPEC was always setting the international price of oil. They were the largest exporter, so therefore they had the greatest influence on the price of oil. And they used to play around with that price to impact the U.S. economy. They would lower gas prices to hurt U.S. producers. They would raise gas prices to hurt consumers. And all of a sudden, now the United States of America was not only energy independent, but we were basically the major influencer of U.S. oil prices. You quit hearing about OPEC. No one talked about OPEC at all until Biden took the oath of office and he shut down, pretty much really restricted U.S. oil production. And they're doing it across the board. Everyone knows about his executive orders on day one, stopping the production of the Keystone XL pipeline. But they've also used regulatory branches to inhibit our producers from accessing oil and producing oil. Let me give you a good example. Everyone's heard about basically a lie coming out of the White House. When you look at the price of oil going up before the Ukraine-Russia war, we already had significant increases in oil prices, well over $1 a gallon. And immediately the White House started saying, well, it's the oil producers that's a problem. There's still 9,000 leases. Even though we've shut down new leases, there's still 9,000. And they're just not using those. Well, there's an oil producer in Alaska wanted to develop a well that they knew that was a good well, and they already had a lease for it. But the Biden administration went to the EPA and had the EPA deny them access to get to the property. So this is the type of front that they're facing. It's an attack from all sides, whether it's the Bureau of Land Management, whether it is the EPA, whether it's the Forestry Service. They're using every agency in the executive branch to make it difficult. So what we need to do is just undo the policies that are creating this problem. That's the good news we have, whether it's inflation, oil prices, the border crisis, all of the things that Americans truly care about. they're all self-imposed because of big government socialist policies by the Biden administration. So the solution is just undo the things that they have been doing and are continuing to do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you hit on kind of one of the two big buckets that we see driving up costs, and that's regulatory barriers, largely to energy. The other one is reckless spending, Congressman. So, as you mentioned, the administration likes to claim that it's the Russian invasion of Ukraine that's been driving up prices, but we saw elevated inflation going back almost a year now, 5-6% inflation, obviously months before anything was going on with the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And what we know is that the federal overspending is a major driver of that. It's something that folks for a long time really weren't able to make the connection of how overspending was making life harder, but now they're seeing it every day in the grocery store. And so what do you have to say about how that spending has made life more expensive for folks in your district?
Well, it's in several aspects. One is this devaluing the dollar. Every time that you print more money and you flood the economy with new cash, it lessens the value of the dollar, which inherently creates inflation. If the dollar is worth a fraction of what it was 4 or 5 months ago, then it takes more dollars to buy the same thing. So that's one aspect of overspending and deficit spending and this huge debt that we're carrying. Another aspect of it is where they're spending the money. When you look at what happened during the pandemic, if you use Georgia as an example, Georgia took a hiccup in the economy. When I say a hiccup, there really wasn't a downturn in the economy. There was just a shift in consumer spending. During the onset, when there was a limited shutdown here in Georgia, people continued to go out and spend. Instead of going to a restaurant, they were sitting in the drive-throughs, right? We saw drive-through, our restaurants had existing drive-through services were showing record profits. You didn't see people at the theaters. They were all at the Home Depot and Lowe's home improvement centers, right? So we just saw a shift in spending in those conservative run states. By August of 2020, state revenues had already exceeded 2019. So people were still out there spending, they weren't allowed to go to work, right? So what happened with the federal government is with all of these bailout plans that happened, now some of them I think were needed, like the PPP, because it was the government that was forcing businesses and people not to go to work. There were some loans that were, the government made through PPP and other programs that arguably should have been done because the government control, it wasn't the people or the businesses problem, it was the government's overreaction to the pandemic. But then there were other instances like stimulus checks going out to consumers who were already spending money. And the problem we had was we were already starting to see supply chain issues because people weren't at work producing the goods. There weren't enough truck drivers driving the goods. There weren't enough people shipping or receiving. There weren't enough people working in the distribution center. So we started seeing a supply chain issue. But then Washington, D.C. starts spending all this money, giving more stimulus on the demand side, which more people started buying more things. And then you had the ports shut down. Then we're incentivizing people not to go to work. So it's really twofold: the devaluing of the dollar because of the amount of money we're spending, and then throwing money into the demand side, the consumer side, but then putting more restrictions such as vaccine mandates before you could go to work, right? We're putting more restrictions on the supply side. And so it's again, just like the energy crisis, this is self-imposed because of big government socialist policies out of the Biden administration and the Democrat-controlled Congress.
Yeah, it really is ironic. The same administration that wants to have government put more and more money in people's pockets so they can, in theory, go out and spend it and support themselves, is placing more restrictions on the ability of businesses to create and provide those same products and services. So kind of artificially pushing up the prices in both ways. And Tony, as you know, one of the things that we've been trying to tell people at AFP is really the dollar value cost. The average American family now is going to spend an additional $5,200 this year for the same quality of life they had last year. That $5,000, that's the difference between a summer vacation or not taking a summer vacation, replacing a broken appliance, going out to eat every once in a while with your family. And so these are real costs. What have you heard from your district, both from families and from businesses, that we might not be hearing or feeling necessarily where we live?
Well, we're hearing of how badly it's hurting, where people are having to make decisions coming up. Am I going to take that vacation? Which is going to be devastating to our hospitality industry going forward, because they're just now beginning to recover from the pandemic. And so they're starting to make the decision. Maybe I won't do the cruise this year. Maybe I won't go on a vacation, because now I have to pay so much more for my quality of life, just to get by. And now I can't afford the fuel to drive there. Flying with the airlines is getting more and more expensive. When you look at the one commodity that affects the price of everything, it's fuel. And so when the Biden administration made these other bad policies that caused inflation, it's throwing proverbial gas on the fire, pun intended. It's throwing more gas on the fire to just really increase inflation. Because if you look at the price of oil, I mean, oil goes into the manufacturing of everything. A loaf of bread, right? A lot of petroleum products are used in the production of fertilizer. It's used to actually sow the seeds. Fuel is used on the machinery that harvests the seeds to get it in a truck. And fuel is used to get it to the baker to process the wheat into the bread, and even fuel used to actually cook the bread at the baker and then distribute it to the market. And so every step along the way, just selling a loaf of bread incurs significant costs because of the increased price of fuel. And that goes across the board to anything that you buy, whether it's at a convenience store or the supermarket or a piece of furniture or an appliance. The cost of fuel is heavily embedded in the price of every consumer good. So that just even puts a greater impact on inflation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think one of the things that we want to make sure folks understand is, as much as they're seeing cost increases, businesses are feeling those with a number of inputs, as you mentioned, right? And that's going to make it harder to pay their workers more and hire new folks, and of course offer goods and services at a rate that folks can afford. I want to ask you about the administration's response. They obviously are feeling quite a bit of political pressure, if nothing else. We're supporting legislation like Kathy McMorris Rogers' Strategic Production Response Act. It's going to make sure that we're only pulling out of our strategic reserves when we really need to, right? So things like that. Meanwhile, the administration is looking at energy gimmicks. Other Democrats are trying to push tax holidays, things like that. Meanwhile, the administration is still trying to push $1 trillion, almost $2 trillion spending bill that has been repeatedly rejected by the American people and by Congress. And so what do you think about what the administration is looking forward to the rest of this year?
Well, they're feeling the pinch of the American people right now. You see the president with the lowest approval ratings in the history of any president, and the vice president's even worse, and even worse than her is Nancy Pelosi. So the American people are seeing what's going on, and they understand that it is self-imposed. It's bad policy. And so it's what you're going to see is their backs against the wall. They're going to be throwing everything at the wall, trying to get anything done. But the one thing you have to look out for are distractions. They're masters of throwing out distractions. Just a couple of weeks ago, they were trying to use internal politics within the Republican Party as a distraction. And I was interviewed by one reporter about it. And I said, look, this is merely a distraction. Nobody really cares about this stuff because they're more worried about how much they're paying for their groceries right now. And he turned around and he said, well, it's not just a distraction because everyone's reporting on it. And I was like, well, that's your fault. You're the reporter. You guys are reporting on what people aren't worried about right now. And so it's, just this week, it's now been leaked of the Supreme Court decision or an opinion that was written that indicates that maybe there was going to be a decision that could overturn Roe versus Wade. Now, this is another big distraction that you'll see the Democrats use to get people focused on something else. However, I don't think it's going to work because it's really hard to get your attention off your bank book when you can't balance it, right? It doesn't matter what else is going on in the world or Washington, D.C., Republican or Democrat, when you're having to make a decision of whether you put food on the table, buy prescriptions, or take your family on an outing. These are the types of real problems that Americans are going to be facing, and you're going to be facing it even at a greater extent near the election, because a lot of this inflation we're seeing is delayed because we don't know where we're going. So businesses right now are trying to keep their prices as affordable as they can, but they're going to have to continue to increase their prices as the cost of their goods come in. And there is always a delay in that. So by the end of the year, people really, really could be paying significant more for basically everything in their lives.
That's absolutely right. Tony, I want to ask you about the grassroots energy. Carson, we just put out a poll with public opinion strategies asking folks about what they think about this overspending. And it really does reflect exactly what you said. Not only do they understand that the overspending is to blame, they understand that President Biden has been a major proponent of that overspending, and that's making their lives more expensive. The numbers are really astounding, 60, 70% that blame overspending, and they want spending reined in to control inflation. And so we've launched a multi-state campaign, the true cost of Washington, right? That is meant to educate folks on exactly that, right? The true cost of Washington, these regulations, this overspending is making your life more expensive. We'll be at gas stations and grocery stores telling them exactly that. So Tony, as you go around the state of Georgia, obviously a pivotal state this year and for the foreseeable future, I mean, what are you hearing? What are you seeing from people? Are they excited to talk about this and tell their friends and neighbors about it?
Absolutely. The cost of gas, the cost of goods overall are at the forefront of people's minds, and they are very open to hearing a new pathway forward. What needs to be changed in Washington? Who do we need to send to Washington to make sure this doesn't continue any longer than it totally needs to be? When you have average people that aren't politically engaged, feeling that pain when they go to the grocery store, goods they have bought for years, and all of a sudden it's hurting. Their money is not going as far as it can. They're absolutely encouraged to see groups like ours going out there and talking about these issues and talking about positive solutions to fix this major national problem. That actually sets me up for my last question for you, Congressman. I was curious, obviously at AFP, we're an organization of action. Our activists want to take action and get things done for the betterment of the country. What, in your opinion, what message should they be communicating to their members of Congress about these issues? Because oftentimes we hear, well, go vote in November. Well, we want to do something now. What can our activists do now to make sure their members hear that this is the top concern and the issues that you've outlined are problem areas that need to be addressed?
Well, one thing they can do is pick up the phone and call their members of Congress, whether it's in the House or in the Senate. Because as we spoke about a few minutes ago, the Democrats are masters at distraction and deception. They need, the individual members in the Democrat caucus need to hear that these are the issues that people are concerned about, and they demand action now, because the White House is talking about spending several $1 trillion more. What they want to do is buy votes. They know their back's against the wall. They know they're losing in the polls, and they're probably going to lose in a big way in November. But as many votes as they can buy with more excessive spending, that may not they may not lose as many seats if they can do that. And this is the way they really think. They're very liberal when it comes to spending other people's money. And so people need to understand, this is your money. It's your future. It's your children's future that they are wasting away to give away all of these free things that they claim are free, but we know who's paying for it. It's the American taxpayer. So picking up the phone and telling them we need to deal with inflation. We need to stop the regulation. We need to stop the wasteful spending. We need to control the border, because every one of these illegal aliens crossing the southern border is adding costs to the federal government. It's going to add more and more costs to the bottom line, and taxpayers are going to have to pay more and more. So every one of these failed policies is costing taxpayers out of their own pockets. So it's time to get engaged now, not wait until the weekend before the election, as it seems to always happen in my household. Even before I was in Congress, the weekend before the election, my phone's ringing off the hook with me and my wife, with friends and family saying, hey, who is it I should be voting for right now? Now's the time to be engaged. Now's the time to pay attention to what's happening. As I've said, The good thing, the positive thing about this is the issues we're facing with the economy and with inflation are not organic. They're self-imposed by bad policy. To fix it is undo the bad policy, and you undo the bad policy by getting rid of the bad policymakers.
That's exactly right. And that's why we're excited to be on the road over the next several months doing exactly that, Congressman. To Tony's point, there's energy, right? We need to harness that energy, not just in November, but all year long. So appreciate those words. As we wrap up, I want to change gears just for a minute, Congressman. We've done hundreds of these, but there's one particular issue that you've been a champion on in Congress for many years, going back even prior to the last administration, that we at AFP don't think gets enough attention, but we're right there with you. And that is your work on reforming the federal government. That issue got a lot of attention in the last administration. The bureaucracy can be a major impediment, not just of good policy, but of pushing bad policy that, frankly, they may or may not even have the authority to do because they don't make laws. Congress makes laws. And so what are you doing to clean up the way the federal government and the civil service works?
Well, that's a great question. I appreciate it. One of the things to look at, and you brought this up, the last administration tried to reform government and really had a hard time doing it. And part of the reason is that the way that laws currently are, it's impossible to fire someone from federal government service. It takes at minimum 1 year to get rid of a bad employee. And in most cases, 2 years, because the employee has a right to appeal. And currently, probably best to explain it than the way I found out about this problem. It was my first year in Congress. I was on the Homeland Security Committee, and we had this Secretary of Homeland Security, Obama's secretary, in for a hearing. And I asked, it was about their budget, and I asked about one line item on the budget of $384 million. And he said, "I'm glad you asked that, because this is how much we paid people to stay at home and not come to work. $384 million that year." And of course, I'm intrigued with this. And he explained to me that the way that the system is set up right now, these people lost their security clearance, and you can't work in the Homeland Security Department if you don't have a security clearance. And he said they've lost their security clearance, so they can't come back to work. So it takes a minimum of 360 days just to process them out. Well, when you let them know that they're going to be fired because they can't do their job, then they will appear to the Merit System Protection Board. The problem is the Merit System Protection Board has not had a quorum of members since Obama's been the president. So there's no one to appeal to. So it takes another year. So people are literally sitting on the government payroll for 2 years and having a taxpayer funded vacation. The other aspect of it is there's been so many people that we've got instances of people running private businesses on the job with the federal government. We've had people caught stealing federal property, selling it on eBay, and nothing happens to these employees because it's too hard to fire them. So the default method of getting rid of a bad employee, believe it or not, is to promote them to another job. So President Trump found this out when he tried to reform government, and you had so many partisan bureaucrats that just refused to do his policies. Well, there was nothing he could do to get rid of them because it's too hard to fire a federal employee. And if you do not go the direction that the president of the United States in the executive branch, who is your boss, if you refuse to go that direction, it's dereliction of duty and you should lose your job. But there's no way of getting rid of them. So we introduced the Merit Act. And the Merit Act basically puts business type reforms into the hiring and firing process of the federal government. It gives a definite timeline of 30 days with a 30-day appeal process. And at that point, within 2 months, you can get rid of a bad employee. And so we even had the President Trump poll the existing federal employees, and we found out that 2/3 of federal employees supported this type of measure because many of them are caught. They're good employees, and they're catching the slack of the bad employees who refuse to come to work, who steal, who get to stay on the payroll. And so this is the underlying problem that we have in the federal government. You're not going to reform this government until you reform the hiring and firing process.
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is such an important issue. We've talked about issues at the EPA, the Department of Labor, whatever the case might be. You've got agencies that are way overstepping their boundaries, and you've got unaccountable bureaucrats within these agencies that are politicizing work that frankly should not be politicized at these sort of career civil servant levels. So this is also a priority for AFP, Congressman. We very much appreciate your leadership. Obviously, unlikely to move with Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, but maybe a House with new management next year will be something that we'll look forward to partnering with you on. So want to say thank you again for spending time with us today and informing our folks across the country about what you're working on and providing these important perspectives on the inflation and energy crises that we're facing. So appreciate your time and looking forward to continuing to work with you.
Same here. Appreciate the AFP and all that you guys do for fiscal responsibility and good limited government, and look forward to continuing with our partnership.
Thank you so much. Hope everyone has a great rest of the day.